Maybe today wasn't the ending. Maybe it was the chapter heaven refused to let you close. You've been telling yourself it's over. The dream, the door, the version of your life you thought you were promised. You've been quietly grieving something you never got to say goodbye to properly. But what if the pen never stopped moving? What if, in the exact moment you decided to give up, something on the other side of silence had already started to move? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear was written for someone very specific. It was written for you. You're tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes. The kind that sits behind your eyes when you're smiling at people who have no idea what you're carrying. You've done everything right, or at least you tried to. You prayed, you waited, you forgave people who never apologized. You kept showing up to a life that stopped showing up for you. And somewhere along the way, a question started living in your chest, quiet but constant. What if I've been forgotten? What if the silence isn't rejection? What if it never was? What if your greatest unanswered prayer was never being ignored? You don't need another person telling you to just have faith. You need something truer than that. You need to know that what feels like nothing happening might be the loudest thing heaven has ever done for you. So let me tell you a story. It's not really about someone else. By the time it's over, you'll understand why. Picture a woman standing in an empty kitchen at 11 at night, the dishes done, the house quiet, and her hands shaking around a cup of coffee that's gone cold. She isn't crying. She's past crying. She's in that flat, hollow place where hope used to live. She had built a life around a promise she believed was coming. A marriage that would work. A job that would finally see her worth. A door she'd knocked on for years, certain that if she was faithful enough, patient enough, good enough, it would open. It didn't open. It closed. Quietly, without explanation, the way the worst endings always do. She sat in that kitchen and asked the question you've probably asked in your own version of that room. Was any of it real? Did any of it matter? She didn't know that 3 streets away, in a life she hadn't met yet, something was already being arranged. She didn't know that the door closing in front of her was the only reason a different door, one she couldn't see yet, was being built. She only knew the ache, the waiting, the loneliness of holding a prayer nobody else could see her holding. Have you ever held something like that? A hope so private you never even said it out loud, because saying it out loud made the disappointment feel more real. The rain was falling against her window that night, slow and steady, like something patient was trying to get her attention. Here's what nobody tells you about waiting seasons. While you believed nothing was changing, everything was. The delay you hated was doing something you couldn't measure. It was moving pieces you weren't allowed to see yet. It was disqualifying people who would have hurt you later, and it was quietly qualifying you for something your old self wasn't ready to carry. You don't build strength in the moment you receive the blessing. You build it in the moment you almost stop believing the blessing exists. That woman in the kitchen didn't know it, but the version of her sitting there in the dark, exhausted and unimpressive and barely holding on, was the exact version being prepared for something she would later call the best thing that ever happened to her. But she couldn't see that yet, and maybe you can't either. So what do you do with a season like that? What do you do when the waiting stops feeling like faith and starts feeling like punishment? Let me tell you something that will change how you see every closed door behind you. Every delay had a purpose you weren't told about at the time. Every closed door was protecting you from a version of your future that would have cost you more than it gave. Every goodbye, even the ones that gutted you, created space for something your heart wasn't ready to receive while it was still holding on to what needed to leave. Every disappointment you've survived didn't destroy your story. It redirected it. But here's the part I'm not ready to explain yet. There's something deeper underneath all of this. Something that has less to do with what happened to you and more to do with who you were becoming while it happened. We'll get there, I promise. But not yet. I know you're tired of pretending you're okay. I know you've perfected the art of answering, "I'm fine," while something inside you is quietly falling apart. You smiled for everyone else while silently breaking inside. You showed up to birthdays and family dinners and small talk at work, carrying a weight nobody offered to help you hold, because you never let them see it. You've prayed the same prayer so many times, it started to feel embarrassing to keep asking. You've looked at other people's lives, their timelines, their announcements, their apparent ease, and wondered what's wrong with you. Why is it taking so long? Why does everyone else's story seem to be moving while mine stands still? I want you to hear this clearly. Nothing is wrong with you. Some stories are simply written slower because they're being written deeper. There are things happening around your life right now that you cannot see. There's a prayer you prayed years ago and forgot about, one you assumed went unanswered, that is still active, still working, still moving toward you. There's a blessing that already has your name on it, sitting somewhere just outside your current timeline, waiting for the right moment to arrive, not because heaven is slow, but because timing is a form of love you haven't learned to recognize yet. There's a battle being fought on your behalf right now that you know nothing about. Somewhere, some way, resistance is being cleared from a path you haven't walked yet. There's a person who was quietly removed from your life, someone you may still miss, who was never meant to be there when your real season began. And there's an opportunity, closer than you think, that hasn't shown itself yet, because you weren't ready for it 6 months ago. You are getting ready for it now. I'll show you what happened to that woman in the kitchen, but not yet, because before that happened, something unexpected changed everything. She almost didn't go. 3 weeks after that night in the kitchen, a friend invited her to something small, a gathering she had no energy for, no interest in, nothing to gain from as far as she could tell. She said yes only because saying no felt like giving up on the idea that her life could still hold anything good. She sat in the back, she barely spoke, and somewhere in that room, without any fanfare, without any sign that this was the moment her whole story had been quietly building toward, something ordinary happened. A conversation, a name exchanged, a door so small she almost missed it, cracking open. She didn't feel it in the moment. That's the part people don't tell you. The turning points rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as nothing. It would be months before she understood what that night actually was. It wasn't a coincidence. It was the delivery of something that had been in motion long before she ever sat in that kitchen and wondered if she'd been forgotten. I need to be honest with you about something, because I think you deserve honesty more than comfort right now. There is a version of this story where she gives up before that night ever happens. There's a version where the exhaustion wins, where she decides the silence really was rejection, and she closes the door on her own hope before heaven ever gets the chance to open the one it was building. That version exists for you too. There is a difference between giving up and waiting one more day, and that difference is not small. It's the entire story. Giving up ends the sentence before the comma that changes everything. Waiting one more day means you're still there when the answer finally arrives, even if it arrives looking nothing like what you expected. I'm not going to tell you waiting is easy. It isn't. But I will tell you this. The version of you that survives one more day of uncertainty is always stronger than the version that quit the day before the miracle. What almost made you quit? Sit with that question. You know the answer already. Here is what that woman in the kitchen didn't know, sitting there with her cold coffee and her quiet grief. The worst season of her life was not a punishment, it was preparation. The rejection that gutted her wasn't the end of her story. It was protection from a future that would have quietly cost her everything she actually wanted. The relationship that ended, the job that let her go, the door that closed without explanation, none of it was cruelty. It was redirection, wearing a disguise so convincing that even she couldn't recognize it at the time. A year later, sitting in a life that looked almost nothing like the one she thought she was promised, she understood something she couldn't have understood in that kitchen. The ending she feared had become the beginning she'd been quietly praying for all along. But the miracle wasn't only the new job, or the new door, or the new chapter. The real miracle was who she'd become in the waiting. We spend so much time hoping for the external miracle, the healed relationship, the answered prayer, the door that finally opens. But there's a quieter miracle that happens first, one that matters more, one that outlasts everything else. It's the version of you that gets built in the waiting, the confidence that comes from surviving something you thought would break you, the wisdom that comes from watching a closed door teach you more than an open one ever could. The peace that stops needing every question answered before it can breathe again. The patience that finally stops rushing heaven's timing and starts trusting it. The faith that isn't loud anymore, isn't desperate anymore, but has become something steady, something that doesn't need proof to keep standing. The strength you didn't know you had until the season that almost took you out revealed it. That transformation is not a consolation prize. It is the actual miracle. Everything else is just the visible part. Here is what I've been building toward this whole time. The story never ended. Heaven simply refused to stop writing. Every chapter you thought was the final page, the heartbreak, the loss, the silence, the waiting, was never the conclusion. It was the setup. The slow, deliberate, sometimes painful setup for a chapter you couldn't have handled reading too early, because you weren't finished becoming the person who could survive it. You weren't late. You weren't forgotten. You weren't a story heaven lost interest in. You were a story heaven was taking its time with, because some things worth having are worth writing carefully. Maybe success wasn't late. Maybe you arrived exactly when your heart was finally ready to receive it without breaking under its weight. Maybe the blessing you've been waiting for required a different version of you to carry it, and the waiting was never punishment, it was construction. I don't know your specific chapter. I don't know the door that closed on you, or the person who left, or the prayer you've almost stopped praying because it hurts too much to keep asking. But I know this. If you're still here, still breathing, still reading this, still hoping even in the smallest, most exhausted way, then your story is not finished. The ending you feared was never the ending at all. It was the page turning. Tomorrow may reveal the chapter you never believed could exist. Not because I'm promising you a miracle on a schedule, but because heaven has never once needed your permission to keep writing. Before you go on with your day, I want to ask you something. Not to perform, not to answer out loud to anyone, just to sit with quietly, the way you'd sit with a friend who actually wanted to know. What almost made you quit? What prayer are you still holding on to, even after all this time? Which closed door, the one that hurt the most, ended up changing your life in a way you didn't expect? You don't have to have the answers right now, just let the questions do their work. If this message found you today, and something in it felt like it was written just for you, tell me one word that describes your journey right now. Just one, whatever comes to mind first. Or if you still believe, even quietly, even against the evidence, that your story isn't finished yet, share the word hope below. Not because it fixes anything, but because saying it out loud is sometimes the first step toward believing it again. The chapter that hurts the most often protects the ending you'll thank heaven for. Write that down somewhere if you need to. Save it for the next time the silence gets loud. Somewhere right now, the sun is coming up over a horizon you haven't seen yet. Birds are lifting off a quiet field, unbothered by the night that came before them. A warm light is spreading slowly over mountains that stood through every storm without moving. That's not just scenery. That's a picture of what's coming for you. A new beginning that doesn't erase what you went through, but honors it. That takes every closed door, every goodbye, every silent night in an empty kitchen, and turns it into the foundation of something you couldn't have built any other way. Because heaven was never silent. It was simply writing the part you couldn't see.